This is All of It. I'm Allison Stewart, live from the WNYC studios in Soho. Thank you for sharing part of your day with us. I'm grateful that you're here. I hope you're listening to us somewhere cool and shady. It's hot out there. Make sure you check on your friends and neighbors who have difficulty getting around. Make sure they're okay, too. On today's show, we'll hear live music in studio from the band Lord Huron and musician Auguste Pontier. We'll learn about a very special tree who went into outer space and now it's here in Manhattan. And we'll talk about the highs and lows of the World Cup and preview Sunday's big game. That's the plan, so let's get this started with behind the scenes on the show, The Bear. The series, The Bear, is returned for its fifth and final season. If you're a viewer whose mouth has watered at one of Marcus' pastries or found your stomach growling while watching Sydney prepare a French omelet, you have culinary producer Courtney Storr to thank. Storr, who's also a co-executive producer, is a chef from Chicago, whose background includes experience as acclaimed restaurants in Paris and Los Angeles. She also happens to be the sister of showrunner Christopher Storr. So this show about a family-run restaurant is also family-operated. Courtney Storr joins me now to talk about the food on The Bear. Hey, Courtney.
Hello, I'm so excited to be here.
We're glad to have you. Listeners, do you have a question for the culinary producer of The Bear? Do you have questions about how things are run in a restaurant kitchen? Or do you work in a kitchen and you want to shout out something that you saw on The Bear? Call or text us now. Our number is 212-433-9692 to speak with Courtney Storr, culinary producer of The Bear. 212-433-WNYC is that number. Food is your job. But when you were growing up, what was food like around your house?
Oh my goodness. Well, food always represented excitement, celebration. It's very sensory for me. It started by smelling, garlic bread. I always say like it started for me with garlic bread and red sauce. And that wasn't just in my house, but in an area where we grew up. In Chicago, there were so many family-owned Italian delis and restaurants. And very young, our weekends were spent, doing like a family activity and going to a deli and bringing home cold cuts and sandwiches or meatballs for dinner the next day. And so it was ingrained in me very early on, the power of food and the power of love within that.
You worked in one of those Italian delis, right?
I did. I did. I worked in numerous, mainly on the family-owned Italian restaurant spectrum. I worked in a place called Sonny's that was more of a deli concept during the day and switched to, a white tablecloth restaurant at night. And so, at the age of 15 until now, I've been in the restaurant world in some way, shape, or form.
What did you learn in those experiences working in those delis?
That it takes such a team, that the collective is what makes these spaces really, really special. No one can do it on their own, and there's a lot of legacy in some of these restaurants that are, in fact, family owned. But then you have the legacy of people that have worked there for 20 years. Every great restaurant that I've been a part of, I've learned from cooks or dishwashers or porters that have been there way longer than I have, that took me under their wing to teach me. And I think one thing remains true in every restaurant that I've been in is it's only as incredible as the people that work it, and the people that are on the line and show up, and do the grunt work to the finesse work to closing the doors at night. It takes such a team of people to make restaurants come to life.
Where were you in your career when you realized, yes, I am a chef. I'm definitely a chef.
That's a really great question, because I think so many chefs have little glimpses of that as you come up through the ranks. But for me, truthfully, it happened for me on the Bear. Um, I had been working tirelessly. I was a head chef. I've been a sous chef, a chef de cuisine, a culinary director for restaurant groups. And, it was the first time that got to really spread my wings and be like, these are the menus. This is what we're doing. And trusting myself has been a process, I think, that a lot of chefs go through. And my team on the Bear gave me so much support. And, I have a culinary team that works with me just like I would run a restaurant or a kitchen. I have a team, especially for season 3, 4, and 5, where there were other chefs helping me out and training the cast and participating in this way where it felt very collaborative, but I definitely felt like I came into my own and really began to trust my instincts and my intuition.
I'm speaking with Courtney Storer, culinary producer of The Bear. The fifth and final season premiered on FX and Hulu in late June, and the show's fourth season was recently nominated for 8 Emmys. Listeners, are you a fan of The Bear? Do you want to know more about the food on The Bear? Give us a call or text to us at 212-433-9692, 212-433-WNYC. You can talk to Courtney Storer, culinary producer of The Bear. Tell me about when Christopher first started talking to you about this show. He was asking you all kinds of questions. What did he want to know?
Sure. Well, what's really interesting is I lived with Chris. I had been living in Paris and I moved in with him and his girlfriend into their home or their apartment in Los Angeles. And at that point, I was a very broke cook and started working for Animal Restaurant in Los Angeles, which was a pretty tough kitchen to jump into at the time. And, I think he learned a lot from that experience of me coming home late night, waking up in the morning, doing it all again. And when he was sort of writing The Bear, he had it for many, many years before we got to see it on FX.
Mm-hmm.
And so it kind of took on a different life when he started working with FX, which was like the right partnership, to get it going. And that's really when he started to bring me into the writer's room and talk to the whole team at large, which was a really fun process. We went through journals and went through playlists of music and talked
Mm-hmm.
about the time and the heart and the pace of what it feels like coming up at different points in your career. So started pretty early.
If you had to explain to someone what a culinary producer does, how do you explain it?
I would say it's anything from sweeping the floors to getting to train the incredible cast and actors to choreographing a lot of the movement in the kitchen, to the food development, to menus. I would say it's the big details and the very, very small details and everything in between. So at any point, I'm a resource to the cast directly. Oftentimes before we do a scene, we practice a lot, and we make sure that they feel very confident in the task at hand. Because remember, they're also acting and
Mm-hmm.
giving these incredible monologues or dialogues or however many people are in the scene. So we try to prepare them as much as we can. I think a big responsibility of mine is to work with all of the departments, whether it's props to set decoration to the crew,
Mm-hmm.
the camera department, the sound. It's such a team, and everyone has to be aligned. So it's not just that I'm only focused on the food. There's a storytelling element that has to remain constant. The food is a character throughout the story. So making sure it connects with what we're trying to say and working very closely with Chris, Joanna, the directors, to make sure that they feel supported, and set up for success is a huge part of my job.
We had Lionel Boyce on the show, who plays Marcus in The Bear. He goes on to become an expert pastry chef. I want to play a little bit of him talking about working with you and your team.
Courtney Story and Maddie were really instrumental, especially in the beginning, where we leaned on them a lot because they had so many stories, so many specifics. Where if you had any insecurity about like how do I hold this or what's like the physicality of this, they're like, yeah, this, or they just give you a story, and it was just a way to keep us out of our heads with and like focus on like the character and the story as opposed to like, can I do this? But it also helped us because it was just a place to train and like I want to work on specifically like understanding this. How do you do this cutting or XYZ?
All right, you don't have to name names, but when did you find an actor really just really looking like an actor, pretending to be a cook?
Truthfully, I would never let them do that. That was part of my job, and
Interesting.
I took that so seriously that if I felt like someone needed a little bit more attention, we definitely spent time together. There was never a time when we would set foot on set where I didn't believe in them or feel confident in their abilities. That was part of the preparation. That was so important. I always said anytime I'm available, but also I want you to feel so confident that you're not thinking about what you're doing as you're
Hmm.
acting, that it feels natural. So that takes practice. It takes a chef to so many hours. People have no idea. Knife skills take forever. I'm still working on my knife skills. I've been in restaurants for, so long, and these skills take time. So you got to practice.
We've got a couple of questions coming to us via text that says the food always looks amazing. What happens to it after the filming ends?
Great question. We eat it. It doesn't go to waste. We also have a sustainability program. We work with the city of Chicago to make sure that nothing is wasted. But in terms of the things that are edible, remember, like if there's a scene where there's a dining room, the extras cannot eat some of the food. We make sure when they are actually eating that it's up to temperature and all of that stuff. But generally, we are a snacking cast and crew. They love to eat and people get hungry, and we are a very well-fed show. We work with so many incredible restaurants that we constantly order from to get little snacks and surprises for the crew and the cast. But additionally to that, if I'm making bolognese, you better believe I'm sending home the crew with it. If I'm making focaccia, everyone's getting a bite. You just have to consider that there's hundreds of people that are going to be expecting food. So we scaled up throughout the production.
We got a text here that says most back of the house kitchen insider details from the show. For example, I love that they drink water out of a quart container. What other details did you include that we might not think about?
Endless. I mean, that was a big one. I remember Jeremy brought out a coffee cup and I was like, nope, stop, revert, no, delis, delis, delis. But it's anything from, oftentimes I'm looking at how clean their uniforms are at what time in the day. In some Michelin level kitchens, of course, you are in pristine shape, but you're also, prepping things throughout the day, and there's a different like level of organization, cleanliness. A space can feel really cluttered. That's something that I was always talking to the crew and my brother about, is like, hey, it's 10 a.m. There's going to be a lot of production happening, or a lot of deliveries. At noon, it's going to look a little different. At 2 o'clock, the pace is up, the adrenaline is starting to kick in. You've got 3 or 4 hours till service. So I really tried to look at the time of the day and also utilize the space as a tool to show what time it was, beside just looking at the clock throughout the prep day or whatever.
I'm speaking to Courtney Storer, culinary producer of The Bear. The fifth and final season premiered on FX and Hulu. Of course, you can watch it on streaming. Are you a fan of The Bear? You want to know more about the food on the show? Call or text us now at 212-433-9692, 212-433-WNYC. Courtney, when you get a script, when and how does the food enter that conversation?
Pretty early on. Sometimes it's before, the final scripts are sent out. We troubleshoot and we kind of talk about the conceptual idea of the food, and then we make tweaks when the scripts are sent out. So usually I'll receive the script and I'll say, "Hey, I love this omelet, but let's talk about Sydney, and maybe she's using like chips that are on the family meal shelf." And like if anything sparks my creativity, I'll go directly to Chris and troubleshoot, or just kind of say, "Hey, what about this? Have you thought about this?" Which is great because we're siblings, and I think he really trusts me, and I trust him. So I think we usually reach a middle ground there always. But I usually will look at it, and if I flag anything, I try to catch it right away. And then there's things on set that I notice that I'm like, hey, in Chicago, we can't get this ingredient, or we need to pay attention to the seasonality of the time of year that we're doing this dinner service. And would we be able to have that kind of fish? Could we get that kind of cheese? Just paying attention to those really important details that chefs think about.
What was a dish that you felt was kind of risky to put into the show?
Oh, well, the omelet was tricky because I knew we were going to film it from start to finish, but I had full confidence in Io. She's incredible, and I wish I had the confidence that she
Mm.
does when I was her age. I think it's taught me so much. But that's technique wise a tougher one to do, on one take, and she just nailed it. I think there's other dishes where I always want to show the procedural. Like when I think about
Mm.
having pasta on a menu, I'm like, wow, factoring in pasta making on your prep list for the day. And the technique it takes to do that or breaking down a fish. There's always the procedural parts where I'm like, are we showing that enough so people really get how hard being a chef can be sometimes? So I try to get that stuff in there as much as I can when I think about a dish. We show a lot of the final dishes. I'm always like, how can we incorporate the prep that goes into it?
We got a text here that says there's a level of PTSD for industry folks watching the show when someone says behind when they move through a doorway. I feel that in my bones.
So do I. So
The,
do I.
the Bear is a show about a restaurant, but it's also clearly about family, found family, and your brother is show running the show. What do you think the Bear gets right about family?
Just that family can be chosen, family that you can find community, you can find legacy, you can make corrective memories in a place of work, such as, for example, a restaurant. I think people underestimate that sometimes, that there's a lot of healing. I mean, for me, especially in my experience working in restaurants, I always say there's so much of us that are part of the Broken Hearts Club. There's so much um, experience that kind of comes to the table when you're doing something that's very passionate. When I think about working with food and flavor and smell, there's a lot of passion coming. It's very artistic, but I feel like the strongest artists that I've ever worked with have also been through some heavy stuff. So there
Mm-hmm.
is this sort of rigor and passion, dedication, and a little bit of surprise, I feel like I felt when I've been in any restaurant where I'm discovering my colleagues as we're doing this experience of a service. It's almost like being like in a soccer team or a basketball team where you're only as strong as your bench. So there's um, a sense of rooting for each other that you would feel in a family. You want each other to succeed. I know that being a chef in restaurants, I always wanted to make my cooks as strong as they could be and bring out the best, within themselves. And I really feel like in restaurants, especially the healthier ones, you really see that. You see each other grow, rise to the occasion, learn new tasks. And that does something really good for your heart and your brain, I think.
We got a question that says, how important is dishware on the show?
So important. And there was a lot of debates about what we used for sure, because it's truly how a lot of chefs are communicating with their guests coming in is sometimes you're seeing that dishware, you're seeing the plateware, the way it lands on the table, how heavy it is, the elegance, is it light, is it weighted? All of those factors are also the medium where the art is expressed, right? So you think about a plate as your canvas for whatever the dish is that you're creating. So there can be a lot of details like that we got to play with, especially on the pastry station. You'll see in season 5, Marcus is really like, "Hey, these are the ways I'm going to plate my dishes,"
Mm-hmm.
and you see him kind of think outside of the box and do a candy box and a really elevated dish for raspberries. And there's just sort of this art that he's sort of molding his station and his dishes around. There was also a fun, playful example that we did where we served the focaccia in the bread basket that Ibrahim, hated. He hates these baskets. And Marcus's character sort of says, "Hey, here's an example of how these baskets are incredible and beautiful, and we're going to use them because we're low on plates." So there's these little things that make the plating also a character.
What have you learned about restaurants from working on a TV show about restaurants?
Oh my goodness, that it is so interesting to me watching the kind of like how the teams are formed in production, that there is so many people involved in executing a television show the same way that I feel a restaurant is executed. You need each other. That's a very big similarity. I think working in close spaces is also very similar to a restaurant, where in some restaurants you're literally elbow to elbow with each other, and in a television production it's the same way. Silence, you can hear a pin drop, there's tension, you're filming something. It can feel the same way when we're cooking on a line, when there's stress or there's a big service ahead of us. I noticed that there's a lot of parallels there. And again, like everybody's talent is so needed to execute the end vision.
This text says, I love the Bear so much. Just got back from Chicago and I insisted my family go to Mr. Beef, Margie's Candies, and Loaf Lounge for Marcus's chocolate cake. You know, Food and Wine named Chicago the second best food city in America. What makes Chicago such a good food city?
I think it starts with the hospitality that Chicago offers. It's got that Midwest charm. There is a kindness to it that I think growing up within those restaurants in Chicago, it changed how I approach hospitality, especially coming to Los Angeles. It's a little bit more hands-on, open the door, make sure the guest is having a good time and that they come back, that you treat, Joe Zucchero, who originally owned Mr. Beef, and now Chris, his son, owns it. I originally worked for Joe and he taught me very young, like, running a host stand at one of his restaurants, that you treat everybody like family, like a distant cousin or a distant relative. And I think Chicago is pretty good at that.
I understand you have a cookbook coming out.
Yes, I
Tell us a little
do.
more about that.
So I just finished it. I'm shooting the photos soon. And, after doing the bear, I really wanted to not only put the Italian American recipes that I know so well out into the world, but so many of the recipes we did on the bear really brought our cast and crew together. And I wanted to write a book about how I've really learned to face a lot of my own trauma and heartache, and coped with it in restaurants. I've learned how to overcome some really tough stuff because I was needed by my team in a kitchen, truthfully, and how much that has helped turn my life around. So the book will have incredible recipes, but it will also have some parts of my stories that hopefully, inspire other women in food, that inspire other men looking to do food. Anybody, it inspires everybody to kind of think about food and how much the profession can offer.
We got this great text, a little bit long, but I'm going to read it. It says, big fan of the show, worked in food service for about 15 years, and also am working in another industry that likes to organize around a lone genius, usually a white male, and ignores the absolute necessity and collaborative efforts of the collective. I love that the bear uplifts passion, craft, and audacity while deconstructing the lone genius myth by distributing the genius, talent, and curiosity among the collective. Any great work of art and an exquisite meal is, indeed this, is a manifestation of a collective. Thanks for bringing this up in the conversation.
Absolutely. I love, love, love that note. And thank you, because that's so important to me. Yes, it's so true about the collaborative nature that we get to when we see Sydney's kitchen and how much she is listening and paying attention and also using that as such a strength as a leader instead of a weakness. She's not threatened by her people. Rather, she's like, my people are incredible and we can do amazing things together as a collective. And that's my ethos. It's so important to me. I definitely have experienced the other reality that we feel in kitchens, and I'm trying to change that with the way that I work. And I'm happy that people took that away from the show.
My guest has been Courtney Storer, culinary producer of The Bear. Its fifth and final season has premiered on FX and Hulu. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone watching and for supporting us the past 5 years. It's been a dream.